For this tutorial video, we're going to be going over AI objects. Once you've completed AI basics, where we reviewed the shape tools and introduced the pen tool and created those paths, this is going to be your next assignment to tackle. The goal of this is to familiarize yourself and get more comfortable with the pen tool when creating objects. You're going to create a perfect match to the template following the directions below. And an example of what the assignment will look like is also going to be provided to you. The file template is linked right in the instructions here, or it can be found on the monthly preview. Right here, I have the assignment sheet that I'm looking at. I will post the tutorial video after I get that exported, and the AI objects template that we'll be using is also linked here. So what we're going to be doing is open the AI objects. I think that's what I called it, or Illustrator objects. AI stands for Adobe Illustrator. From the monthly preview, you can save it to your Google Drive. So again, Google Drive is not going to give you a preview of what that template looks like because it doesn't support Illustrator files. But when we do open it in Illustrator, if you go to File, Open, you will be able to go ahead and find that AI objects folder. Make sure you get it saved into your Illustrator folder. Since I already have it open, I don't already need to open it again. Using the pen tool, you're going to create a perfect match to the template. Make sure that you have no fill selected or the template is going to disappear. Step number 2, create all objects using a 2-point solid rainbow gradient stroke and a no fill color. So I always like to read those first 2 steps because they tell me how I need to go ahead and set up my document. So when we're all said and done, this is what our image should go ahead and look like when we're done finishing our recreation in Illustrator. And the reason why I'm having you use a rainbow gradient is because as we're using the pen tool for the first couple of times, it's really nice to have a visual if you're doing things correctly and making sure that your paths are all one continuous line segment. And so to visually check, you're only going to see red on the left and you're only going to see purple on the right. And then there's going to be that rainbow gradient that spans across that object from left to right so that you can see whether or not you're doing things correctly. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So I will probably grade these at 300%. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here a little bit. And all of these different shapes have different concepts that were selected so that we could go ahead and practice, especially leading into our next assignment. You can see I have the recreation layer already set up for you, and you should have your rainbow gradient in your swatches palette. So I'm going to go ahead and select that rainbow gradient. I'm going to make it my stroke color, and then I'm going to bump up my stroke weight to a 2-point. And as my instructions in step 1 and step 2 say, I need to have a none fill. And that is to ensure that my template doesn't disappear and I get to create that perfect match. So once all that is set up, I'm going to grab my pen tool and I'm just going to start on a straight edge. I always like to hold shift down. You can see shift kind of locks it into like 45-degree angle increments so that I create that perfectly straight line when I do have straight lines, which is really nice. All right, so these little rounded corners here, I do have a straight line up until about that point. And then if I hold the Alt key down, I see the V, Alt key. Oops, that didn't work. See the V, Alt key, there we go. Now I'm gonna click and drag a new control point and a new control handle to create the curved Bezier line here. But notice how far I'm not pulling my control point and control handle away from my anchor point. And that's because this is a really small curve. And the smaller the curve, the further or the less distance that your control handle needs to be from that control point. So I'm going to come over here, create my next one. I'm going to see the V, but I'm just going to click on that anchor point because now I'm going back into a straight line. And then there's my next anchor point. I'm going to see the V option key. I'm going into a curved Bezier line. So again, it's pretty small. I'm going to click and drag that control point not too far away. That curve ends about here before it starts into a straight line again. So I'm going to reactivate that end anchor point by clicking on it once. And then I'll come in and create these straight lines. Again, see the V, Alt key. I'm going to click and drag in the direction of my curve. My curve ends about here. See the V, I'm just going to highlight it or click on that anchor point once because I'm going back into a straight line. My straight line ends about there. These little curves, again, you do not need to click and drag very far because they are small. And you're going to notice as I'm moving that my gradient is updating. And if I were to accidentally, let's say I accidentally mess up, deselect what I'm working on, I grab my pen tool, I think I reactivate that end anchor point, but I don't. And you can see that my gradient starts over and it's not being connected and updated. That means that your paths aren't connected. So you would need to come in and either delete that or connect some anchor points from those two paths. So again, if you have to click off of your path for any reason, for like editing or something, you can reactivate, so that / reactivate that end anchor point. Now you can see that Bezier line is active along that entire previous path, which means that you're now building off of that already existing path and not creating a new one. So keep that in mind as you're doing this assignment. All right. And then I'm going to hold the shift key down, again, creating that perfectly straight line. I'm a little bit off, but that's okay. And then we'll go ahead and create that closed path. So my line isn't quite straight there. And then I want to select that entire Bezier line here. And I just want it to match the template a little bit better. Now, everything looks okay. I'm not crazy about this anchor point where it's at. So I'm going to move that so it matches the template a little bit better. So it's not so hard pressed there. And then this point here, whoops. I think I need to zoom in a little bit more. There we go. I'm going to come in with my direct selection tool, and then I just want to smooth that out. That anchor point here was kind of funky. Now that I'm zoomed in, I can see that there's an anchor point right there. Getting all these funky symbols pop up. Reactivate that end anchor point. I just want to smooth that out a bit. Okay. That is how you do the leaf. Again, notice the gradient is starting with red on the left and ending with purple on the right. That's exactly what you want it to look like. On to the shell. Again, we're going to grab our pen tool. I like to start with a hard corner, so I'm going to come up this side of the shell. I'm going to see the V option key. I'm going to click and drag in the direction of my curve. My curve ends here. You never want to put an anchor point in the middle of the curve because they create naturally hard corners. So you always want to go where that curve ends. All right, don't put more anchor points than you need to. That's something that I will be going ahead and checking for. We're going to see the V. I'm going to reactivate that end anchor point. Hold the option key to click and drag that control handle out. And again, we are trying to match this template as close as possible so we don't see any of that gray. My hard corner ends here where my curve ends, and my straight line for the other side of the seashell ends. There we go. All right, now the bottom of the shell is a little funky. So I got one big curve here, and then it kind of stops there. And then I'm going to go into another curve. So I'm going to see the V option key. This little curve kind of ends here before it starts into that downward facing curve. See the V option key, click and drag in the direction of your curve. My curve kind of ends here before it changes direction. All right, see the V option key, click and drag in the direction of your curve. Curve kind of ends there. It's just a little one. So again, these control handles should not be pulled very far from your anchor point. And then this curve ends here. All right, but if you just click, it's going to stay like this. So when you close a object on a curve like we are right now, you have to hold down that Alt key when you see that closed path, and then you need to go ahead and also click and drag in the opposite direction to create that curved line. Otherwise, it won't let you manipulate it, and you'll have to go back in and redo it anyway. So again, closing on a curve, when you're closing an object, you will need to go ahead and hold down that Alt key. So I'm just going to come in and tidy some things up so that I match my template a little bit better. Oops, I missed my control point. So I don't see any of that gray. All right, so there is the seashell. Here we go. So next one is going to be the key, and the key is very simple as long as you create a perfect circle for the key like handle and then a perfect circle here. Don't try to recreate these perfect circles with the pen tool. I don't even try to use the pen tool. I use my ellipse tool. So I'm going to show you a little bit of a cheat here. I'm going to start in the middle of my circle. And remember, holding down Shift is going to go ahead and create a perfect circle. Shift and Option at the same time is going to create that circle from the center outward. And then the space bar is going to freeze that object so that we can go ahead and reposition and move it. So I'm going to create a circle that matches our circle here perfectly. Now, obviously here we don't have, if I were to undo what I just did, we don't have that circle that shows up here. So what we can go ahead and do, I want to bring my circle back. Oh, it'll let me. I accidentally went up too far. So I'm going to remake that circle. So I'm going to show you how to get rid of just that section of your circle so that we can make it a perfect match. I'm going to go ahead and create the inside keyhole here while I'm on the ellipse tool. Again, I'm holding down Shift Option and the space bar to freeze my object. All right, then I'm going to come in with my selection tool. And what we want to do is we want to select this big circle. And I'm going to come in with my pen tool. And let's zoom in a little bit more. So with the outer circle active, we can go ahead and add anchor points to our active Bezier line. You're going to see the plus sign. That's for our add anchor point symbol. And what I want to do is I want to follow this path for my template, and I want to line it up right where I need that anchor point to go ahead and break the circle and start kind of the teeth on the key, if you will. And we're going to do the same thing up here where that line intersects my circle. I'm going to add an anchor point. Then what we need to come in and do is we need to edit this section here. So I'm going to come in with my direct selection tool. You have to deselect first. Otherwise, if you try to do this next step without deselecting, it will delete your entire circle, which is not something that we want. So now I'm going to reselect my circle, and I'm going to click on this anchor point kind of on the right quadrant between the two anchor points that we just added. And I'm going to press the delete key, and it's going to delete that whole Bezier line between the two anchor points that we just created. So now what I can do is the easy part is come back in with my pen tool. I need to reactivate this end anchor point, or I could start here. It does not matter. And I'm just going to follow along the rest of the key with my straight lines. And again, we want to make sure that that gradient is updating and that all of the red stays on the left and the purple will be on the right. We'll come in and close that. We didn't need to hold Alt here because we're not closing on a curve. So that is what my key looks like. I'm going to come in with my direct selection tool, and I'm just going to get this a little bit closer so it matches the template a little bit better. I'm just reactivating these end anchor points, and I'm selecting them after I reactivate them, and I'm just moving them ever so slightly to match my template a little bit better. All right, so the next thing that we need to do is the wrench. The wrench has some funky curves here. So I'm going to start on a curve. I'm going to click and drag in the direction of my curve. My curve ends here. So again, we don't want to put an anchor point anywhere between these 2 points because they'll create hard corners that we don't want. I'm changing the direction from a curve to a straight line. So I'm going to reactivate this end anchor point. And then I'm going to go into my straight line. I'm going to see the V option key. I'm changing my direction into a curved Bezier line. So I need to see the V Alt key to click and drag these control handles. Reactivate it by clicking once because I'm going into a straight line. See the V Alt key, click and drag in the direction of our curve to create that curved Bezier line. Reactivate by clicking once because I'm going into a straight line now. I'm going to click and drag in the direction of my curve by holding the Alt key to create that new control handle and control point. Changing direction, going into a straight line, so I'm going to reactivate by clicking once. And then I'm closing on a straight line. So again, I'm going to see that circle for closed path, but I don't need to hold down the Alt key because I'm closing on a straight line and not on a curve. So I'm going to deselect the outside of my wrench, and then I'm going to come back in with my pen tool, and we need to do this inside little section. Again, these little curves are not so big, so I'm not going to click and drag that control point and control handle very far away from my anchor points. Coming into a straight line, so I'm going to see the V option key, click and drag, Alt key, sorry, I'm so used to a Mac. Click and drag in the direction of your curve and then the opposite. I'm going to see the V, click once because I'm going into a straight line, and then I'm going to close my path. I'm going to come back in with my direct selection tool, and I need to edit some of these paths so they fit the template a little bit better. And I think I'm pretty happy with the wrench. All right, and now what we have is the train. The train. A lot of curves here. We have some shape tools that we can go ahead and use for the window, the star, this headlight with the ellipse, and then our wheels when we get there. So I'm going to go around the outline first. Again, with these perfectly horizontal and straight lines, I'm holding the Shift key down. Might help you out. I have a little bit of a curve, so I'm going to go ahead and not drag out my control points and control handles very far from my anchor point. And I'm going to reactivate that end anchor point by clicking once. Again, I'm going into a straight line, so I only need to click on it once to reactivate it. All right, we have a little bit of a straight line here. Don't try to do this whole thing as a curve. It won't work, I promise. See the V option key, click and drag in the direction of your curve. We have just a little bit of a curve there. So again, make sure you don't do that whole thing as a curve because it won't come out. And then we have a lot of straight lines in a row. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key to help me make those perfectly horizontal and vertical. Now I'm going into a curve. So I'm going to see the V Alt key. I'm going to click and drag in the direction of my curve. Click and drag in the opposite direction, reactivate that end anchor point because I'm going into a straight line now. Now I'm going back into a curve, so I'm seeing the V. I'm going to hold the Alt key. I'm going to create one big curve here. You shouldn't have any anchor points in the middle of this big curve. Reactivate by clicking once because you're going into a straight line. Now we're going back into a curve, so you're going to see the V Alt key. Click and drag in the direction of your curve. Again, one big curve. There should not be any anchor points in the middle of that. See the V, Alt key, because we're going into a new curve in a new direction. Reactivate by clicking once, and then we're going back into some straight lines. So I'm going to hold down that Shift key, come and close my object. All right. Pretty happy with that. I'm going to come in here, reactivate this Bezier line. Maybe, there we go. Now it's moving for me. And I'm just going to move that up to match that template a little bit better. And then I'm going to come in with some of my shape tools. I'm going to break this off because I am going to be using a couple of them. My ellipse tool can be used for this headlight here. Again, I'm using the space bar to like freeze my object and reposition. The star tool is going to be used for the star here. And then our rectangle tool for the window. And then we have a whole lot of circles going on for the wheels. And I'm going to do one wheel at a time because we can simply create one since they are identical. And then I'm going to move this down so they share the same center point. So I'm holding Shift and Option, going from the center outward. And then I'm also pressing the space bar to freeze my object so they all share that same center point. All right, Shift and Option, space bar to freeze my object. And there we go. Now, if you think you're a little bit off, what you can do is come in with your selection tool. You could select all 4 of those circles all at once, and then you can use this align palette and you can align them horizontally so that they all have a same center point horizontally. And then you can also use align vertical so that they are perfectly lined up with that same center point and they're all concentric. Now what I can do is I can hold down with all 4 of them selected, the Alt key, and you can see that my arrow key turns from a solid black arrow into a black and white arrow. And I can simply click and drag to duplicate all of that. Oops, I missed my center. You can see I'm missing that center one. Not a big deal because I can come in, reselect it. Maybe. I think I'm zoomed out too far. Need to be zoomed in. There we go. Let's try again. Ooh, it doesn't like me. I think it's too small. So I'm going to come back over with my ellipse tool and I'm just going to create a new one since it's not letting me grab that with the double black and white arrow. I'll make sure I select all of them this time. There we go. And center those up both vertically and horizontally. And then I'll make sure I do the same thing over here. All right. And then we have all of our objects. On our notes, in the lower right-hand corner, we're going to type in AI Basics by your first and last name. Make sure it's styled for 21 point, Brionic bold, in black, not in all caps. So the last thing that we'll need to do is title our drawing. So I'm going to grab my type tool. I'm going to click once in the bottom left. I'm going to type in AI objects. Oops. Objects by your first and last name, not my first and last name. I'm going to grab my selection tool. I'm just going to move it onto the printable area. Again, you want to give yourself about a 1/2 inch perimeter to avoid that gutter, that printer cutoff if you do decide to go out and print this. Double click on it to highlight all your text. Again, the type style is going to be Brionic bold. The type size is going to go out and be 21 point. So that's what your assignment's going to look like when you are finished, except for I'm going to have your name on it and not mine. You're going to save the work as AI objects with your initials so that you don't save over that template. And you're going to fill out the student grade column, and then I will come and grade this on your computer. So this is the rubric. I will go ahead and have hard copies. If I forget, you can fill out the student grade column on the computer, and then you can always print it out. This point value is 17 formative points. You can see that I've identified the objects that I'm going to be grading and then the criteria in which I'm going to be grading them by. And that is AI objects.